Okay, so this is Ask an Author with Julia Kelly, and I do have my wonderful special guest, Alex Kiester, here with me to talk about the truth about Ben and June. The reason that you're seeing this after the appointed hour and the reason it's a pre-recorded session is that unfortunately Zoom and Facebook and YouTube and all the different backups we have are not agreeing with us today. So we're being a bit thwarted by technology, but I promised Alex that I used to be a TV producer, and so I'm used to stuff like this happening. So we're just going to roll with it. We're going to do our very best, and we're hoping that my assistant Mark has been able to get a post out asking you guys to give us comments live. Either way, we're going to have a great discussion about a really, really fantastic book. So welcome, Alex. Thank you for dealing with everything that's going on right now, technology-wise. I really apologize. But perhaps you could tell us a bit about the truth about Ben and June.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me, and no worries about technology. It could be my fault. I feel like I'm a technological curse. Technology never works for me, so probably my fault somehow.
Well, you know what? The very first time that I ever went live for this, and then the subsequent interview I had with her, poor Kristen Harmel, I've never had an interview go up live with her. Something always happens. It always goes down. She's such a lovely person. I don't know why that's the case, but we'll just roll with it.
Okay, rolling with it. I love it. Yeah, so for those of you who haven't read it, The Truth About Ben and June is about this married couple, Ben and June, and they have just had their first baby together, and now they're really struggling with new parenthood. So one morning, Ben wakes up to discover that June is missing, and so is her suitcase. She has left him alone with their newborn son. So if you can imagine, Ben starts doing everything he can to figure out where June went and why she left in the first place. But the more he uncovers about his wife, the more he realizes just how little he really understands what she's been going through. So I like to say there's a little thread of mystery. There's a whole lot of heart, but at its core, my novel is an exploration of a marriage and what it means to share your life with another person.
I think it's so interesting that you say, there's a little bit of mystery, there's a lot of heart. I will admit I went completely cold into this book, not knowing anything about it except that, somebody goes missing and that was it. And I wasn't entirely sure if this was going to go sort of the Gone Girl thriller direction or in a different direction. And you took me in a place that I really didn't expect. So congratulations for doing that, because I think especially with people who read a lot, there are themes that you see come up consistently and you can kind of start to spot things. And I'll say I did not spot what was going on with June in this case. So because this is a spoiler-filled discussion, which I think makes it a little easier talking about this book.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Can you sort of refresh people's memory about sort of what is it that happens with June and why are we sort of led on this this discovery of not only sort of what's happened to her, but also what's happened in their marriage in the past?
Yeah, absolutely. So originally, Ben and June sort of disagreed about whether or not to have this baby. June was a little bit more hesitant. She's this professional dancer, and that was having a baby was really going to be, was essentially going to end her career in the company that she was working with. Ben, was a high-paid attorney, and he has always wanted a family. He didn't really see the reason why they wouldn't have a baby. Anyway, they talk about it. They have this baby, and unfortunately for June, things are not going well for her. She, to kind of cut to the chase, she is suffering from undiagnosed postpartum anxiety and a little bit of depression as well. And it's undiagnosed, and she does not know that she's suffering from this. And as the weeks are passing, she is sort of spiraling out of control, and her mental health is really suffering, and it's affecting her relationship with Ben. It's affecting her relationship with kind of her new friends that she's made in this neighborhood. And it all kind of culminates, and she feels like she needs to protect her baby from herself. And so she decides to leave and flee to Texas, where her mother was born. And well, it's getting into another can of worms, but she is grieving the death of her mother. And so she kind of goes to the place that is going to kind of bring, that she thinks could bring her solace by being in the place that, you know, formed her mom. But I guess the short answer to your question is she's suffering from postpartum anxiety depression, and that leads her away from her family.
I feel like one of the really wonderful things about sort of opening up of discourse and conversation around pregnancy and everything related to fertility, infertility, all of these different things, miscarriage. One of the great things is that people, I think, are more aware than they used to be about some of the things that can happen around having a child. But this, I think, is still one of those things that is not talked about as widely as it might be. I know that there's sort of, you know, people mention things that used to be called like the baby blues, and that's a very different scale to what we're talking about happening to June here. And I have heard about, you know, I have friends who've been treated for postpartum depression, but this level of it, where it's sort of really beginning to dramatically affect her life and affect her, is it fair to say her sort of relationship with reality and being able to distinguish what is true and what's real in her life, that I feel like you hear about so much less these days. What was it that drew you to the subject?
Well, a few things. Two things in particular. I am very open with the fact that I suffer from anxiety. And so I'm sort of fascinated by this idea that your own worst enemy can be your brain. Like it can kind of turn against you. Like chemicals aren't, you know, working properly, and it can kind of turn against you. And you're absolutely right. In the book, June is confusing something that she thinks is happening is maybe not quite happening. So the line between like fantasy and reality is really blurred for her.
Right.
And then because I do have a history of anxiety, I was sort of exploring almost like a worst case scenario for me, because I don't have children. I've never been pregnant, but I have ambivalence about that. And so I was almost exploring, like, if I do have a baby one day, and because I have a history of anxiety, will my postpartum experience be plagued by these heightened mental health issues? And if so, like, what is that going to look like? So it was almost me sort of writing out like a nightmare scenario for me of like, could I get through it, you know, if this happened to me?
It's interesting you say that, because I think often people, you know, will ask authors, you know, is there any part of you in this book? And my answer is always, you know, there are parts of me in every book, and it's just a question of how much and how conscious am I of what's coming through on the page. But it sounds like this was a very conscious decision that you made.
Yeah, it was. I mean, as a matter of fact, like the whole plot, even other than the postpartum anxiety and depression, was based on my own exploration of a fear of my own ambivalence of entering into motherhood. I'm one of those people, like I in most capacities, I know what I want from my life, and yet I've never known whether or not I want kids. And I just gave that ambivalence to June, you know, and that's really the germ of inspiration where this book came out, is exploring my ambivalence about parenthood. And then, of course, then I was exploring my fear of the postpartum. So yeah, there was a lot of me. I think it was me like seeking kind of answers and seeking this catharsis to the things that were keeping me up at night.
Well, one of the great things about writing is it does sort of force you to work through and think through, even if you're sort of giving different motivations and feelings to a character, you are forced to kind of think through the logical path of those decisions, or, you know, the goals that that person has. And so, you know, that makes complete sense to me. Can I ask about the decision to spend a lot of this narrative in Ben's perspective and with his point of view, when the book was sort of an exploration of potentially a woman's ambivalence towards the idea of getting pregnant and having a child?
Yeah, I always knew that I wanted it to be this exploration of a marriage. That was very clear on the outset. And actually, to your point earlier, it sort of started out as maybe like a Gone Girl type of situation. And then I realized halfway through writing it that I couldn't write the deterioration of their marriage in the way that I had set out to, because Ben and June really loved each other. And I realized that halfway through. And so I turned it more into a love story as opposed to a mystery. But I knew in writing a marriage, I wanted to tell the two sides of the story, because there are multiple sides to every story. And especially in a marriage, there are two people in that. So I felt like, to give justice to that story, I wanted to show what June's going through. Yes. But I felt like in doing that, I didn't want to antagonize Ben too much. So I wanted to show, like, he makes a lot of mistakes. He's a very flawed individual, but he's also going through a lot in the book as well. He's under an immense amount of pressure at work. He's kind of in his darkest days in his career. And so I wanted to show the reader that there's sort of two sides to this, and June doesn't necessarily understand Ben's point of view or his truth, and Ben doesn't understand what June is going through either. So I definitely wanted to show the balance of that.
I think it's so interesting because you have two characters here at the heart of your story, neither of whom are, good or bad, or, they're fundamentally, they're just people, right? They're very human, and that means they're very flawed. In some ways, I could really empathize with Ben and sort of the pressure that he feels, and, the way that he's sort of lived his life. He maybe has, fallen into some traps that meant that he is not doing the thing that makes him the happiest. He's not spending the time that he would want to spend with his family. And there's a lot to unpack there. When you go about giving characteristics like that to a male character who's kind of falling into some of those stereotypically patriarchal male traits, how do you pull him back from the edge of being too much of a stereotype and make him more human?
Yeah, I love this question, and I love everything you said, because I don't think literature should be about, good people and bad people, right? It's about people. People are not inherently good or bad. So through Ben and through June, I did want to explore that kind of murky area of, like, who's at fault here? Well, kind of everybody, kind of both of them. So it was hard for me to get into Ben's character, far more so than June. Because I think I was treating him as, like, well, how do I write this, like, monolithic male experience, which is, right. There's not a monolithic female experience, which I don't know why it took me so long to realize there wasn't a male one either. So finally, what kind of unlocked Ben for me was that I identified his basic desire as a human and his basic fear. And his basic desire is that he wants to be a good person. And his basic fear is that he's not good enough. He's not having a good enough impact on the world and his family. And speaking of the things that keep me up at night, especially these days, I am plagued by thoughts of, am I good enough? Is my carbon footprint worth all of this? Am I having a positive enough impact on the world? And so that's how I got into Ben. And that's when he kind of, like, showed himself to me.
That's really interesting. So sort of, it's not just the characteristics that you gave to June, a female character. It's also the characteristics you gave to your male protagonist as well, in sort of informing how he goes about the story. One of the things that I thought was really interesting was, and I wish I had the pull quote from it here, but you take a moment in the story when they're kind of discussing, he's found her and they're having a moment where they're finally starting to talk in their relationship. It seems like for the first time in a very long time, about what they each actually want. And it's a very subtle moment, but it's an important one, I think, where she says to him, well, would you have wanted to give up your career in order to have our child? And he says no. And she kind of has this moment of, well, why do you think I would have wanted to do the same thing? And I understand that there are physical reasons why she would have had to put her career on hold. And you go into wonderful detail about sort of the cutthroat nature of the dance world. But I thought that moment of understanding between two people who have been coming at the idea of being parents in two very different directions was really, really interesting. And really insightful. Is that something that, is that one of the subtleties that you really wanted to convey in this book? The difference between the male and the female perspective in terms
Oh,
of parenting, I should say.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I definitely wanted to show that problematic, gender paradigm that essentially states, a male's sole responsibility to his family is to provide financially, and a woman's sole responsibility to her family is to nurture. And going back to whether or not these characters are good or not, Ben was raised in a male, of the patriarchy as well. And not only that, he was raised in a family that really sort of upheld the patriarchy and said that that's how we do it. So he was, the word that's coming into my head is brainwashed, which is like that feels, I don't know if that's accurate. That feels a little like heavy-handed, but he grew up thinking that this is what he had to do. And so I like to think of this book as a coming of consciousness for Ben, and realizing that his worth does not solely lay in providing financially for his family. He needs to be there mentally, emotionally, physically for his wife and son. And he can also share the burden of financial responsibility with June. I mean, she wants it. She wants to work. She wants to provide as well. So yeah, that was definitely at the forefront of my mind as I was crafting that, for sure.
And when it comes to her profession and her professional life, I really enjoyed the focus on dance and the less glamorous side of that world. Is that something that you're really familiar with, or was it a lot of research that went into that?
Oh boy, it was a lot of research. I mean, I grew up dancing. I was on my high school dance team, and after college, I taught some Zumba and took dance classes. But other than sort of the moves, like the releve, pas de chat, all of that, I didn't know anything about what it took to craft a career out of professional dance. So I had to do a lot of research, and the most invaluable thing that I did was I reached out to the Martha Graham Company, and they have just a general email. I think it was like information at Martha Graham or something. And I wrote it thinking that nobody was going to respond to me, because I had one writing credit to my name. Like, I was really like a no-name author. I didn't have a book deal at this time. So I wrote them thinking, oh, no one's going to respond to me, and I have to figure out how to do this. And literally within 24 hours, I had 2 dancers reach out to me, and they sat down with me. I mean, they're in New York, I'm in Texas. So we were over the phone, but they sat down with me for hours. And
Fantastic.
I know, they were so generous with their time and energy and information. I was really blown away. I mean, I wrote them what I hope is, a very heartfelt section in my acknowledgments, because they were invaluable in the process. And really, from the time I met them to the 6 months after that where, I was editing and then I sold my book, they answered every email. They answered every follow-up question. I was like, why are you doing this? You're so nice. So yeah, it was very helpful.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, it's so interesting reading those parts again, because it's a world. I love books where you sort of you got to look behind the scenes at a world you don't know that much about. And I knew some people who modeled in New York and who danced and who did different things and things that, again, have that sheen of glamour. I was telling you before, I used to be in television news. Yeah. Not glamorous. Looks glamorous because it's on TV, yeah. But it's not glamorous. And I find it really interesting when you get an insight into a professional world that I would never be able to touch otherwise. So it really read wonderfully on the page. And I thought it was such a fantastic reason for June to be at a bit of a crossroads, as well, in terms of her, decision whether she did or didn't want to be a mother. Not that decision, the decision sort of is made for her when she becomes pregnant, but it was really interesting seeing the impact of that in all these different areas of her life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and that's why everyone says, like, well, why is she a dancer? Why is she a dancer? And there are kind of 2 reasons. Like, one, I love writing about creative careers. I have I've dabbled in dance. I also was an actor for a few years. And then of course now I'm a writer. So I'm always fascinated to hear how other creative careers go. I just love the creative process. I'm so fascinated by it. So putting myself into the dance world was really fascinating. And then, like you said, when she gets pregnant, it ups the stakes that decision so much for her, because her body is her artistic medium, unlike any other art form. Even acting, if you get pregnant, you can, your body type changes. You can play different characters. You can play a pregnant person. It isn't necessarily like a showstopper. Whereas for dance, you can dance for a while and you can come back from it, but pregnancy changes a woman's body, and it is hard to necessarily go back to the kind of athlete you were before. So yeah, I mean, that's why I wanted to make her a dancer. And it was really fun sinking into that world. So I'm glad it came across well on the page.
It really does. And it's, it's obvious that the sort of one-to-one research really made a difference. You also thanked a few women who shared their experience about postpartum anxiety and postpartum depression. Can you talk a little bit about how you went about making those contacts and, being respectful of those stories as you went about writing the book?
Yeah, I was very fortunate in that I didn't have to. Oh, that sounds bad about what I'm about to say. I didn't have to go far in my circle to find women who have suffered from postpartum anxiety or depression. So I can't, saying I was fortunate, I strictly mean in a creative sense. Of course, I'm not happy that, my friends have suffered from that. But the truth is, it is a very prevalent thing that women go through. And so I knew a lot of women who had gone through it, and they had been open with me about it. And so I just reached out to the people who I knew had gone through it and said, I don't know how you would feel about this. I would love to interview you if you're okay with it. And I thought that I was going to get a lot more rejection than I did, because I thought, who wants to sit down and relive like some of the worst days of your life? Like, it can get really, really bad. But I was blown away by the vulnerability and candor that these women approached the project with. I mean, they were so generous with everything that they told me. I mean, they really opened up. And as you can probably imagine, these interviews were extraordinarily emotional. We would go in, and then hours into it, like we would both be crying. And, I really felt a lot of respect and affection for everything that these women had gone through. And like I say in the acknowledgments, I really did want to turn this book into a love letter to women who have suffered from mental illness, because I just gained so much more of an understanding about what they go through, and it can be so devastating. So I hope it reads as, that love letter that I intended it to be.
I think it certainly does. We actually have a question, so thank you for dealing with our technical issues here.
Yes.
Miriam asks, first of all, I'm very happy with the way that the book ended. Were you ever thinking about a version of the book where June didn't make it? And she apologizes if the question is too grim, but I think it's one that maybe people would be wondering about because of how serious her condition is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I never entertained that idea, actually. And that's not to say I didn't entertain a lot of ideas, because this book has changed so much over the course of editing and writing it. But I knew I wanted her to make it in the end. I knew I wanted a happy ending. For a few reasons. I mean, I so fell in love with Ben and June, and I wanted them to have that, moment where they came back together. And also, in talking with these women who suffered from postpartum depression and anxiety, of course, because I was talking to them, they had all come back from this dark period, and they had so much perspective about what they had gone through. And they really showed me that it is like your chemicals, that your synapses are not firing correctly. And I wanted to show a glimpse of that hindsight, where June makes it through and she very quickly realizes, no, I don't want to do this again. I'm not going to try. And so, yeah, I didn't entertain that idea. I wanted it to be a happy ending. And I'm glad that Miriam, that you liked the ending, because I couldn't do anything too bad to my characters.
It is funny, you live with these characters for so long as you're writing, and you do go through different iterations and drafts and all of that, but they do begin to feel very sort of integral to the world you've been working in for so long. And it's hard to do things to them. Now, I'm sort of infamous for doing bad things to characters, but that's okay. Works in the end. Can you talk a little bit about the myth? Because I think this, we haven't touched on it yet, but this is such a big part of what's going on, especially in the midsection of this book, both in the past and in the present as well. How did you decide that this was going to be an element that you wove through the story?
So I actually stumbled across the story of Medea in my research for the Martha Graham Company. I had heard about Medea, but I'm not well versed in Greek mythology as a whole. So I was researching the Martha Graham Company, and I came across their repertory, their list of ballets, and I saw this ballet, and it was called Cave of the Heart, which is what it's called in the book, and it's based on the story of Medea. And I read the synopsis of the ballet, and I thought, oh, this is like an interesting parallel to what's going on between Ben and June. Maybe I could weave that in, like I play a little role in the book. And then I started digging into the story of Medea and reading different analyses of it and different interpretations, and reading the play by Euripides. And that's when I thought, oh, this is actually a perfect parallel to what's going on in the book. And it's going to play a very big role. So that's kind of how I stumbled upon it.
So you mentioned sort of the editing process and different drafts of this book. How different is this book from where we see it now to when you first sort of felt like you had completed the story enough to call it a finished first draft?
It is a completely different book. I mean, truly, it has a completely different plot. The similarities is that June was always suffering from postpartum anxiety, and she had always left Mikey and left Ben. But in the first iteration, June is writing, instead of writing letters or diary entries to her mom, to her dead mom, she's actually writing to a living pen pal whom she has never met before.
Okay.
And yeah, and so you were getting June's emails, and then you were also getting these pen pals responses. And the kind of theme that I was playing with in this draft that didn't make the transition to the final draft is I was playing with this idea of how we present ourselves online can be so different from how we are in real life. And so June was sort of using the emails to be her most honest self, like what she's doing in the final draft of Ben and June. But her pen pal was actually using the emails to create a completely different reality for herself.
Interesting.
Yeah. So anyway, and then the pen pal goes missing, and then June tries to track her down, and she's looking for this pen pal. So I mean, truly, that's a completely different book. So.
Yeah, no, I'm always so interested by when that happens, because I've added significant characters, I've deleted significant characters. My book that comes out in 2023, I completely rewrote the back third of the book in edits, because sometimes it just doesn't present itself the way that that is going to work best for the story when you first put it down on paper, and it's part of the process, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I know. It's like so weird even talking about that story because it felt so long ago. But and I think what wasn't working that my agent pointed out to me is she said, you never really understand this pen pal because she's using the emails to like create a false identity. So we never actually understand who she is as a whole. So the reader is prevented from ever connecting with her. And then,
Interesting.
yeah. And so she made, I mean, like hearing it spoken out loud, I was like, oh, duh. Like or why would a reader care about somebody they don't know? So anyway, I wasted a lot of time on that one, but we got there in the end.
I was going to say sometimes it's necessary to write the book that is the book that ends up being published. So yeah, I think it's interesting. We always get questions about process and about sort of the behind the scenes of being a writer, because I think people are interested in it. Some people are interested in writing their own books. I always warn that every writer's process is different. So how do you typically sort of start off the process of writing a book, and what does that look like for you as you go through those stages?
It's so interesting. There's that idea where women like forget about giving birth because they sort of black it out. Sometimes I feel like I black out the beginning stages of a book. I'm like, how did I come up with this? And I think the reality is it just takes so much longer than people think. It takes months and months, or at least for me. And it's kind of a murky process of I'll take notes about something, and then I'll research something, and then I'll jot down an outline, and then I'll research and take notes and brainstorm a different ideas. So it feels really, that process feels really muddy for me. I will say, once I get a lot of like the brainstorming out of like, what is the general idea of this book? Who are the characters? What's the timeline? All of that. A big part of my process is writing a pretty comprehensive outline. I'm one of those like type A writers. I have an outline that's like color coded, for each of my characters.
Okay, so I love this stuff. So what typically goes into that outline? Is it like what's going to happen in each scene, or you're looking at sort of like emotional turning points, or?
So I typically have like a big index card for each chapter. Mm-hmm. So I know the like narrative arc of each chapter, like what's the beginning of the chapter and what needs to happen by the end of it.
Okay.
And like for Ben and June, I had so many different perspectives. I would have like June, let's say, in the color orange or something, and then Ben was in green, and then the flashbacks were in pink or something. So I would try to make sure that those were balanced, and in their order. And and then I have like a big bulletin board in my office, and I tack it up and cross things out. And but yeah, I mean, I typically know like the narrative point that each chapter is trying to accomplish. That's like the big thing that's in my outline.
That makes sense. And then
what about you? I'm so interested.
So I'm all over the shop. I do some form of outlining. So typically what I'll do is, and this has changed over the years. I used to just go forth and write, and then realize about halfway through the book that I'd finally figured out what the book was about, and then have to go back and start rewriting. So I started to sort of train myself to work off of a synopsis, so 3 to 7 pages, and then I write in Scrivener. So typically what I'm doing is breaking scenes down into their constituent parts, and I'll kind of write for a little bit until I feel like I'm starting to get a sense of, if this is a multiple POV book, do I have to write all of one character's point of view scenes straight through so that I get sort of a strong sense of that story, or can I go back and forth and alternate? And it's been different for different books. So but usually what I'll do is I'll start kind of getting down what I think kind of high level every scene in the book is going to be, and then typically what I do is 3 scenes at a time. I'll write down an outline for each scene, write through those, and it kind of gives me enough to be working towards. Like, it's hard to describe. It's enough to be working towards like, okay, I know what I need to write for, several thousand words and I can get into a flow, but I'm not so far ahead that I'm kind of losing track of where I am now. That seems to be a nice compromise for me. But you know what? I've really and truly found that, every once in a while there's a book that's just like, no, you're not, you thought you had a process. You don't have a process anymore. I say that it's out the window and you're gonna have to figure something else out. So it's really up in the air for me sometimes.
Interesting. Yeah, I feel like we need books to remind us of that every once in a while. I feel like my next book is reminding me, like, actually, you don't know what you're doing. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, well, and it's that funny thing of no matter how many books you write, you sit at the beginning of the book that you're writing and you just think, how did I do this?
Yes, exactly. That's the moment that I'm in right now. I'm like, how do you write a book? I don't know.
Do you typically have a really strong idea of who your characters are when you do start that outlining process, or does that sort of develop along with?
I feel like I have a strong sense of who my characters are. It was interesting. I was getting drinks with a fellow writer recently, and she said, have you started, well, this was a few months ago, and she said, have you started your next book? And I said, no. And I said, the reason is, I think, is because I don't know my protagonist names yet.
Yeah.
And which I had never like spoken that out loud, but then I realized if you don't know their names, it's really hard for me to understand who they are, because it's almost like you're just thinking of this like abstract nebulous character, and I need to understand who they are to understand what their names are. So I think it's kind of like once I have a name, then suddenly things like start happening for me. So for my next book, I think I'm going to have like 2 or 3 kind of main characters, and I have only one character's name. So
okay, so you're not
clearly
quite there yet, but
yeah, yeah, exactly.
It's funny, those kind of little things can be so significant. And I have an issue with naming people as well. And I will grind to a halt and just stare at my screen trying to name somebody if it doesn't sort of work. And so I try ahead of time to do a lot of that sort of plotting out, at least basic details of who these people are. Also, because I have a bad habit of, accidentally switching people's hair color, people's eye color, when they were born, all sorts of stuff in the course of a book, a first draft. I just get sloppy basically. Because I'm kind of speeding through, just trying to get it down on the page. But I've learned that it's better if I go in having a strong sense of who these people are and also what they want. So it was interesting listening to you talk about sort of what is it that Ben, thinks that his life is supposed to be, and why is he fearful of, or what does he want and what is he fearful of as well. An interesting technique to think about.
Yeah. I feel like I do need to understand like who my characters are, but I'm just like you too. I get especially when you said like their ages change and stuff, like their timeline's different. That is my biggest weakness as a writer, which is like, it's a silly little thing, but I cannot do math when I'm like aging my characters. I'm like, wait, so what? How old are they in this? And like, I just worked on something, and the copy editor came back, and I literally had gotten the math off by like 10 years. It was so embarrassing. I was so embarrassed, like reading her comment of like, this is like 10 years too late. Oh my God, sorry. I'm like giving myself the giggles, but it was like so bad.
Well, I totally get it. So I'm a January baby. And so I can do January. Any other month, it's just like, you know what? I don't know. I got nothing. So often my main characters their birthdays will be very early in the year and I don't have to sit there and be like, it's 1941. How old would this person have been? Oh, wait a minute. It's July. Okay, let me do the math.
That's so funny because I just had a character and her birthday is December 1st because it's the day after my birthday. It felt too like narcissistic to give her my birthday, but I just wanted to keep track. It was like December 1st.
I completely understand. People are sitting there thinking about like, oh, writers are really worried about like when is the muse going to come? And no, we're worried about like messing up our timelines and our copy editors shaming us because it's happened.
So so many times, so many times.
Exactly. Well, if you don't, could you give us a hint about what the next book might be about? I know you said it's early in the process, so I don't want to spoil too many things, but
Yeah, I mean, I would if I could. I really don't know anything really about the plot yet, but I love historical fiction. I've always read it, and I met my I met my editor recently in person for the first time. We were kind of talking about my next book, and she was like, "Have you ever thought about historical fiction?" And I was like, "Yes, I think about it all the time. Like I want to write it." So I went out, I went to Barnes and Noble, and I just did the thing where you get all the books, on
oh,
World War II.
oh yeah.
So so I'm reading The Splendid and the Vile right now. I got a book about, I can't remember her name, but she was this New York kind of socialite who became a spy, which is sort of like like a big inspiration for me. I think I might want to play with the idea of sort of this unlikely spy, maybe, or unlikely resistance fighter, something along those lines. So I know it's not much, but I'm really in that like research phase.
But I think this is interesting for people to hear about because I think it's sometimes very easy as an author to be like, oh, well, I read a book and it was obvious that this is the character that I read. Sometimes it takes a lot of time to figure out, and absorb, and especially if you're going into an era that you haven't written about before, because this would be your first historical fiction, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a lot of research and a lot of background because you're going to get stopped while you're writing and be like, how do people use trains? Like, let me go spend a day looking at sort of like how people moved about the country or whatever it is that you're looking at. It's the mundane details that we sometimes don't think about when we're more focused on sort of, okay, what was going on in the war and what globally was happening. And it's often the little things that add all of that texture and then of course help form the characters that you're going to write about.
Yeah. And I'm noticing I'm going down all these rabbit holes to where I'm not even getting the research done that I originally thought I needed to do, because especially with that time period, I mean, and I feel like you're sort of you're the expert on it, but I am researching World War II, and then I'm like, well, I feel like I need to back up. So I'm researching the 1930s and the Great Depression, and then I'm like backing up even more because I just watched this documentary, and this one man said something that really stuck with me. And he said, can't remember it exactly, but he said, God has never missed a day in creating days. And he said, everything's connected. And so, World War II was so connected to the Great Depression. It was so connected to World War I. So I just keep going back in time, and I'm like trying to research World War II, and I feel like I'm going to get to the 1800s before I know it. So,
well, it's funny because it's always a very personal question about like when do you stop doing the research and when do you start doing the writing? And often, for me at least, it's when I feel equipped enough to write about the subject that I'm not stopping every 5 minutes being like, does that make sense? But I can still do research along with the writing process if I need to. And my general rule is when I'm actually writing, if it takes more than 5 minutes to look it up, I log it as a question and I go back and I just figure it out later. Because if it's not a big structural thing, if it's a small thing, I can figure it out after the fact and kind of fill in some of those research gaps. But I know that feeling of sort of thinking, how do I get my arms around this huge subject without, drowning in everything?
Yeah. So what are your favorite, I mean, we talked earlier about some fiction, but do you feel like you turn to like documentaries or books, or how did you do it originally when you were first writing about World War II?
That's a really good question. So I know that when I was writing The Light Over London, which is my first historical fiction and was the first World War I, I was lucky enough that I found a book that had basically taken the transcript of oral interviews with three women who ended up serving in three different services in Britain, so all the auxiliary services.
Uh-huh.
And there was one who actually was a gunner girl, working in the ATS, working on the big anti-aircraft guns. So that was really, really helpful, because at least I had sort of the context of what her life would have looked like. And
Right.
I was building that character out. I didn't want to mirror the experience of this woman because I was writing about a fictional character, but I at least had a sense of sort of what the structure of this woman's day might have been like, who she would have been interacting with, the danger that she was in as she was, firing these guns. A lot of the technical stuff, which sometimes is very easy to find, and sometimes super simple things. Like, you'd think that somebody would be as obsessed with an anti-aircraft gun as they are with, a Blenheim bomber. But I've written about anti-aircraft guns, and I've written about Blenheim bombers. And let me tell you, the Blenheim bomber guys are all over it. Not so much on the anti-aircraft guns, at least at the time that I was writing it. So, it's really interesting, the things that come really easily. But I did a lot of sort of base research around the Blitz, because I was writing about London. I did some base research about just understanding the timeline of the war, which can be tricky, and things
Yeah.
like rationing, things that would have affected people's day to day. The one wonderful thing about having now written several of these books is that I have at least enough of sort of a working knowledge of the era. Although my knowledge is very sort of 1939, 40 into early parts of 41, and then 44, 45. So I'm now writing a book in sort of, I think it's going to be 42, 43, because I'm in that same stage as you are. And I'm really realizing I have massive gaps in my knowledge. So it's going to be interesting. It may be a bit like starting all over again.
Yeah. But at least you have that kind of the scope and that context of, the war in general, which I'm realizing, and I don't have a good basis for. And I'm also realizing, like, why was I not educated more in this big thing that happened, involving most of the entire world? Like, I don't know. That's a different topic entirely, but
Exactly. But it's an interesting question. But no, I think if you're going the documentary route, I think that's a really, really good way to sort of get a grounding in the basics. And then you can go off into your specific subject and be much more sort of niche and nerdy about, aspects of just this one particular thing that you're looking into. But it's really, really interesting. It's such a fascinating time period with so many things going on. And if you're writing about a woman, it's such an interesting time for women's stories as well.
yeah. I love historical fiction. So I'm excited, and I think that's a good sign. I'm like excited about the prospect. I'm excited about doing the research. It's just tricky because, like, I don't even know where I'm going to set it yet. I'm like, New York or France or England, so it's like hard to know.
You never know.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm like, maybe all of them, which is daunting. And I'm like, oh boy, now I have to do all this research. But
well, I know there are a lot of historical fiction readers in the Ask an Author group, so you'll be in very good company when this book comes together and you're writing through. So I want to be sure, before I'll let you go, I want to be sure to ask you about anything that you've read recently that you've been enjoying, any recommendations that you have. People are always hungry for book recommendations, as am I. So
yeah. I am listening to These Precious Days by Ann Patchett. Ann Patchett's like one of my favorite authors of all time. And this is, one of the ones that I haven't read. It's her latest. And it's, for those of you out there who love audiobooks like I do, it's narrated by Ann Patchett, which just kind of makes it even
interesting.
Yeah, more special. And it's a collection of essays. So it's, not a novel, which I typically read. I mentioned I'm reading Splendid in the Vial, which is very informative. And let's see, I just finished The Burning Season by Allison Wisdom. She blurbed my book, and she is a fantastic writer. She's just her sentences are just blow me out of the water. They're one of those she's one of those writers that has each sentence is like simple and so powerful at the same time. Yes. And so The Burning Season is not what I read typically, but it's about this cult in Texas, and it's very creepy and unsettling. And at one point I literally had like full body shivers going on. I was like, oh, so it was good. It's a good, like, fun summer read for sure.
Okay, wonderful. Well, this is interesting. I think I don't think she's been recommended yet during the course of these discussions. So this will be something new, which is exciting. So,
Oh, good, good.
well, I want to make sure that people have a chance to follow you on the internet, however it is that you that they can keep in contact with you, so that they can, of course, read this book and read your next books. So, how would we go about finding you?
Yeah, so my website is alexkiester.com. That's where, I post essays and, news and all of that stuff. And I'm also on Facebook, although I'm not great on Facebook. I'm typically where I'm most at online is Instagram, and my handle is Alex Kiester Writer.
Great.
So yeah, I love connecting with readers. It's so much fun. So yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again so much for doing this. Thank you for watching and for bearing with us as we come a little later on to your timelines than we expected, but we got there in the end. And please, ask questions, have a discussion in the comments. The whole point of this is to be a book club. So I would love to hear what you guys think. And, if you guys have any additional questions, perhaps we can do a little sneaky commenting session after the fact. So thank you so much. And we'll see you guys next time.